And then we're starting a new series this week that I'm super excited and I'll be honest, a little bit nervous about. And it's called Be Reasonable. Say be reasonable. Right? And this is the idea of don't just follow the script. Turn to someone and say, don't just follow the script. All right, this is about thinking about life, evaluating what's coming at you, the decisions you're making, the conversations that you're having. And I'm excited about it because I think this could be one of the most freeing concepts that we've gone through in a long time, just for your own life, and super eye-opening and illuminating. I'm a little nervous because I'm going to try to teach it more towards Gen Z, Gen Alpha. All right, so turn to someone, say it with kind of like, looks like they're 20 plus, and say, this is going to be above your head. All right? We're going to use terms and concepts that you may not be familiar with, but hang in there with me because your kids know all this stuff. And they're the ones that need to think in fresh ways. They're open to it, and they're just not getting any help. They're bombarded by so much information that I want to give you, hopefully, a whole framework for rethinking life and navigating the cultural change that's happened in the last 20 years, and ask some of the questions that the church just doesn't ask anymore, and provide a way to think through those for yourself. So it's kind of like an apologetics, but it's not really. When we normally think about apologetics, it's here's the answer to a hard question. What I want to do is say, here's the hard question, here's how you can think about it reasonably, so that you don't have to memorize all these answers, but you actually have an approach to anything that life or the culture or the changes throw at you. So I'll be honest, I've taught a lot of apologetics over the years, and I went back through stuff, and like 90% of the stuff I taught 10 years ago isn't really an issue in people's minds anymore. And 90% of the questions are like, oh, I should probably talk about that, never talked about before, because things are changing so rapidly. So here's kind of the theme verse behind it. Colossians 2:8 says, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the traditions of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. And so this is my hope, my desire, my prayer for you is that you wouldn't be taken captive by thoughts that really have no point or going nowhere and will ultimately cause you to align yourself with things that aren't true, that don't align with reality. So I want you to think freely. Turn to someone and say, think freely. All right, just think freely. Like, I know a lot of times we come to church and we're like, okay, this isn't a thinking session. This is like an eye-open nap, all right, where I can just kind of tune out and he'll speak for about 40 minutes, and then I'll get awake and we'll go watch the World Cup together, right? But I want you to think freely. And so this is what Paul is saying here. He says, don't be taken captive in your thinking. Don't get caught. Don't get trapped. Don't get captivated in your thinking. I want you to be free to think instead of caught and unable to think, unable to reason. So don't be taken captive by philosophy. The word philosophy simply means the love of ideas. And so Paul says, don't get caught up in the love of ideas that are empty. They're lacking in substance, a point, or a benefit. And that of deception, kind of at the root of it, they cause you to believe an untruth. These are the kinds of ideas that will take your thinking captive. It's a lovely idea. Say lovely idea. A lot of ideas are lovely, right? That you can be whoever you want to be. I used to think that until I tried to get into the NBA, and it was made very apparent to me that no, you can't be whatever you want, right? That was not it was a lovely idea. It just wasn't grounded in any reality, right? And it's according to or based on the traditions of men. And this word in the Greek means accepted social patterns, the way society does stuff. And so a lot of the ideas are based on what everybody else is doing and the principles of the world. These are the underlying spiritual attitudes that the world has embraced. And so as we're thinking about our thinking, realize that we can get caught, we can get trapped by ideas that are empty, that cause us to believe an untruth, that are based on acceptable social patterns and really line up with spiritual forces that are directing everything around us. And so today, I want to talk about something that everybody has, right? Everybody has it, unless you're maybe 3. But most 5-year-olds have it now. This is surprising to me that 63% of 5-year-olds have this. Almost every adult has it. And that's I want you to be reasonable about your feed. Be reasonable about your feed. What is a feed? A feed is a personalized stream of content selected and ordered by an algorithm based on what it predicts will hold your attention. So if you have a cell phone and you use any number of apps, there are algorithms that drive those feeds that curate content for you, and they present that to you. So what are examples of some of the most common feeds? This isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but if you use any of these platforms, these all have algorithms that are predicting what will hold your attention. And they're curating content and feeding it to you. That's why we call it a feed. It's a diet that's being curated and presented to you to hold your attention. So think of it this way. Your feed observes you. It watches. It watches. I don't know if you know this, like Instagram, TikTok. It watches whether you pause, not even if you click on something. It watches how long you wait before you keep scrolling. So it's watching, it's observing, it's taking note, it's developing this incredible profile of who you are, what you like, what holds your interests. It doesn't care what your stated values are. It doesn't care what you identify as. It doesn't care what religion you belong to. It's just watching your behavior. It's watching what actually catches your attention. And that's why I love this verse from Colossians 2:8, because what did Paul say not to be? Don't be captive. And yet this is what the algorithm is trying to do. It's trying to take your attention captive. It's trying to captivate your attention. And so once it builds a profile, it starts to predict. So it looks at the profile, and based on what it knows about your behavior, it starts to predict what kind of content is going to be interesting to you in the future. And so it's not just observing you. It's not just building a profile. It's starting to predict things about you. And then in its prediction, it goes out and tries to find content. So it's actually scouring the whole internet for you. It sounds really helpful, doesn't it? Right? I don't have to go look for anything. The algorithm's doing it for me, and it's doing it 24/7. Everything that's new out there, it's looking and trying to find it, right? So if you're a foodie, it's out there scouring all the posts on the local food trucks in your zip code, and it's finding that information. If you're a gun person, it's out there looking at gun shows and Reddit and blogs and trying to find content that's going to appeal to you. And it starts to curate that into a list ranked on what it predicts will be most interesting or engaging to you. And then it tests it by showing it to you. So it takes what it's curated, you open the app, it starts feeding the content that it's built based on this profile that it's working on 24/7 in the background, and then you start scrolling. And what happens is you start scrolling. It starts, oops, wrong way. It starts watching you again. And it just keeps refining this process. Just keeps over and over again looking for all the content out there that will hold your attention. So your feed is what feeds your understanding. And it doesn't care about contradictions. It could show you something that is from a Buddhist monk and then a Catholic priest and then an atheist, then some 16-year-old kid, and it doesn't care what their worldviews are. It doesn't care what the philosophy is behind those ideas. It's just trying to capture your attention. All the feed wants is your attention because that's how the platform makes money. The longer you spend on it, the more ads they can show you and the more money they make. So your attention is the ultimate product in modern society. That's what everything's geared around. You go on Amazon, do you know there's an algorithm behind Amazon? Your Amazon account is going to show you different things than my Amazon account is going to show me because it wants me to spend more time on there, because what does the research show? The longer I spend on that platform, more money I'm going to spend. And so they invest hundreds of millions of dollars into these algorithms to try to predict what products I will likely spend money on. So you don't have to be on TikTok. You don't have to be on Instagram. Any platform. You can be on Pinterest. It's the same algorithm driving that, right? It's all about your attention. And so here's what's important. This is why this is important. Content in your feed is repeated constantly until it gets normalized. And it becomes so familiar to you that it's no longer questioned. And this is how your feed starts to shape your belief. It's not trying to convince you that things you wouldn't have thought, maybe from your upbringing, aren't true. It's just trying to make you so comfortable with it that you stop questioning it. You know, the average Gen Z spends about 8 hours a day engaged in feeds. That's a lot of repetitious content. And the average child is getting their first online device where they have access to feeds at about 5.5 years old now. That's normal. And you send your kids to school, they're gonna give them a device. Our state will pay. It'll hand them a tablet and say, here. And your work has to be online. You have to be connected to the internet to be a part of the education system today. And so from kindergarten on, it's part of the system that they're in. And so our beliefs get shaped not by what is true. I don't know why that's not advancing. Not by what is true, but by what keeps getting repeated. I want you to think about this. Our beliefs are shaped not by what is true, by what keeps getting repeated. This is what's shaping the belief system of most people today, even adults, even you. Right? How many of you have a cell phone? All right? How many of you honestly have feeds, multiple of them? Right? That's repeating content and information to you. All right, so 1 Peter 3:15-16 says, in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that's in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. What I want to talk today about is how can we prepare to become reasonable? This is what Peter's asking us to do. He says, be prepared to give a defense. And before you answer, he says, you have to settle the authority question. Being reasonable begins internally, not verbally. We're going to see underlying all these truth claims that our feeds are making is a question about authority. Who gets the final say? What's the real basis for this truth claim? Whose authority is it based on? So Peter starts off and he says, hey, before we get into making a defense, make sure you've settled the authority question. Who's Lord of your life? This is the main question. Who's actually Lord? Who gets the final say? Is it yourself? Is it science? Is it Jesus? Who's the Lord of your life? Have you set Jesus as Lord? If not, it's going to be difficult to be a reasonable Christian. If you haven't settled the authority question, then you're going to be vulnerable to any form of authority that claims it gets the final say. Then he goes on to say, be prepared to give a reason. And the word he uses is defense, this word apologia. Say apologia. And that's where we get the word apologetics, and it just means a reasoned answer. A reasoned answer. And then he said, for the reason, so give a reasoned answer for the reason or logos, a word or message or narrative for the hope that is in you. And this hope is an anticipation of a need being fulfilled. That's what hope is, right? I was looking for a special spice the other day, and I went to an Asian market, and I had hope, right? It was a special Thai chili. I didn't go to a Mexican market because that would have been false hope, right? I could have gotten jalapenos, I could have gotten serranos, but I wouldn't have been able to get Thai chili, so I went to an Asian market, and I walked in with a sense of hope that this need I have is going to be fulfilled. And so Peter's saying, I want you to think through how you're going to give a message that explains why Jesus fulfills the needs in your life. And he says, do it with gentleness and respect. See, how we answer is part of the answer. The way we answer is as important as what we say in the answering. So he says, use gentleness. And this is being mild and even-tempered, right? There should be like, you know how the different platforms have different filters for content, like you can't, post anything about blowing up the world or things like that, right? They filter out that kind of stuff. I feel like they should put like gentleness and respect as the baseline filters for social media. I think it'll probably like cut down like 90% of posts, right? If you actually had to be mild and even-tempered in your responses to people. And then he says, live in a way that makes your answer authentic. He says, have a good conscience. This word good means morally excellent. Conscience is the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. And the idea here is we can't defend Christianity if we aren't living like Christ. Does that make sense? All right? If you're not willing to live like Christ, it makes it really difficult to defend Christ. And so he says, live with a good conscience, have this morally excellent way of understanding what Jesus would have done. Because our behavior is a key part of the defense. People aren't just listening, they're watching. Now, with that, I want to give you an acronym. Of course I do, because I just love acronyms, right? So the acronym is REASON. Say reason. And this is the framework. We're going to use this every week to look at the things that are happening in our culture. How do we understand them? How do we think through them? This is something that you can do with your kids to help them start thinking critically about the stuff in their feed. So how do you handle your feed? Well, be reasonable about it. And so the R stands for recognize the claim. Say recognize the claim. All right. E stands for, any guesses? Evaluate, that's a good one. I'm going a different direction, though. Empathize with the appeal. Empathize with the appeal. Every claim has an appeal to it. And if you're going to be reasonable, you've got to empathize with that. Well, I get why you'd want to think that or believe that. Every claim has an appeal. If we're going to be reasonable, we can't be people that are dismissive of the genuine appeal. And so empathize with the appeal, then ask about the underlying authority. What is this claim asking me to believe? What's the appeal behind it? And what's the authority that it's based on? This is the reasoning process. And the S, any idea, any thoughts on the S? Smile. That's got, yeah, that was, it's always helpful, right? It's always helpful to smile. Stress stall. Spiritual, simplify. Spot the shortcomings. Spot the shortcomings. Every claim outside of Christ has a shortcoming. We're going to teach you how do you actually spot those shortcomings. And notice, we haven't done anything in terms of arguing yet, have we? We're just trying to understand. We're trying to empathize, we're trying to see what's really being said. And then the O, opportunity, offer would be a good one. This one's probably wouldn't get this one. Own the outcomes. Own the outcomes. And this is about taking the idea out to its logical conclusion. What would happen if everybody believed this? Let's own that. All right, it says you're having a conversation, accept the premise for argument's sake, and let's own the outcome. Right? Like, if truth's relative, what's the outcome of that? If your truth is different than mine, if everybody's truth depends on their perspective, what's the outcome of that? What does that tell us about truth? There is no truth. Are we willing to own that? Even your truth isn't truth, right? And so own those outcomes is part of the reasoning process, is to take it to its natural conclusions. And then the N is name the need Jesus fills. Every belief, every claim is trying to fill a need. Why do people want to why do they want to set their own identities? Why do they want to determine their own gender? Why do they want to have abortion on demand? All these things are attempting to fill needs. And in this person's mind, this idea is the best idea to fill that need that they've heard of. And it may just be from repetition, that they've just heard it, they've seen it, they've read it, they've liked it, their friends have liked it, 5,000 times, to the point where the idea is no longer questioned in their mind. This must be the solution for it. We need to be able, if we're going to present a reason for the hope we have, name the need that Jesus fills. And this is where you begin to offer a reasonable alternative, because you're understanding where the person's really coming from. Instead of who's right and who's wrong, it's what need does Jesus actually fill? And they may never have heard that ever before. And so tying back to 1 Peter, recognize the claim. This is about understanding what's being said, empathizing with the appeal. That's using gentleness and respect. Asking the underlying authority is about Christ as Lord. Spotting the shortcomings, that's offering a reasonable defense. Owning the outcomes, that's about having a good conscience, that you actually live what you're suggesting. And then naming the need Jesus fills, this is about sharing your hope in Jesus. And this is what Peter is saying, be ready to give a reason. Are you ready to be reasonable? All right, so let's talk about the first one, recognize the claim. Say, recognize the claim. All right. Before we can evaluate an idea, we have to recognize what truth it is asking us to actually believe. So before you can evaluate, you have to recognize what truth is this asking me to believe. And so recognition is the first step in being reasonable. If you can't recognize, you can't be reasonable. You're just going to argue. Turn to someone and say, arguing isn't reasonable. All right? So it doesn't start with, let me argue with you about why you're wrong. Let's both try to recognize what we're being asked to believe. That's the key. Do you know what you're being asked to believe? Behind every conversation, every post, every show you watch, every ad that pops up is a claim. Every single one. What is a claim? A claim is simply an assertion that something is true or factual. In every conversation you have, every show you watch, there are claims that are being made, assertions that are being made that this is what's real. And so there are 5 underlying assumptions in our culture about the truth. And this is what I want to help you start to recognize today. So the first assumption is that truth comes from within. This is an accepted assumption in our culture. The truth comes from within. That makes self the highest authority. If truth is not revealed or taught, but it comes from within, then I am the highest authority on what's true. This is a cultural assumption. Second cultural assumption about the truth is that my feelings reveal what the truth is inside of me. So how I'm feeling about things is what points me to what's true. My experience reveals what is true. And then my identity expresses what is true. Self-expression is lived truth. Now, do you see why it's so important to understand before you begin to discuss? If you don't get this, you don't realize that when you are arguing a truth with someone who has these basic cultural assumptions, you are attacking their sense of who they are. It's no longer the idea that's being challenged. You're challenging their very sense of self. That conversation is going to go very differently than just whether 2 + 2 is 4. My freedom protects my version of the truth. Right? So external limits on me are oppression because they're taking my freedom to express the truth because I've discovered it for myself because I'm the highest authority. And then the last one is that love affirms it. Disagreement, therefore, is rejection or harm. So these are the 5 underlying assumptions that our culture has about truth. Now, recognize that your claim that I don't know, my slides aren't moving forward. There it goes. All right, so recognize the claim that truth originates in me, my feelings identify it, my identity embodies it, my freedom defends it, and your love validates it. This is how our culture is approaching its understanding of what's true. This is how kids in kids gathering right now, this is how they're being taught to understand the truth. All right? You got to understand how your kids are thinking, and what we're seeing is that, especially in teens nowadays, that they are not having these conversations with their parents because the stakes are too high. They don't want to be rejected for who they think they are. And so they're going to wait until they leave the house to spring all these ideas that have been percolating in their minds, in their hearts for years. And then you're going to go, wait, what happened to my kid? Well, your kid never saw you as reasonable. You never got into it with them about what are the underlying assumptions behind truth? What's the claim that's being made? Let's talk about that. What's the appeal behind it? You ever talk about that with your kids? Why is this appealing? I get that. I understand why you'd rather hold that idea than this idea. I get the appeal. Or do you just tell them, no, you're wrong? That's stupid. Why would you ever think that? How many conversations do you think they'll have with you after that? So I want you just to look through this typical feed. Imagine you're scrolling on your phone, right? That's why I wore my Nike Airs today. Because I've been influenced, right? These are just an average Gen Z feed today. They're scrolling through. Which ones would you click on? Which ones are you like, yes, amen? All right, this is just a normal feed on Instagram. What were the truth claims? Did you recognize them? Because they're subtle, but they're there. Let's go through them. What's the truth claim here? What's the possible truth claim? It says you can love Jesus without organized religion. What the truth claim is that faith is personal. Right? My experience reveals what's true or real. My love for Jesus is what validates religion or not. Church is unnecessary. This is the claim. And doesn't she look sincere? She looks believable. She doesn't look mean and angry, right? You take most pictures of pastors that are posting out there, they're like this, they're aggressive. This gal's just like, and it's like, oh yeah, I believe her, right? But the underlying idea is that self is the highest spiritual authority, not the church, not the Bible. Did you recognize the claim in the post? Just seems like innocuous. You can love Jesus without organized religion. I know a lot of Christians that would agree with that. But do they understand the claim behind it? What about this one, right? With my Air Jordans. What's the claim here? What's the possible truth claim? I don't know if you can read the post. It's culture kicks, wear what feels like you. Style speaks first. Matthew James said, need these, fire, right? Right? So I put my Air Jordans on. I'm like, yeah, fire, right? I am on fire today, right? I am cooler than 58, right? Even though Jordan's older than I am. So the claim is that style expresses identity. And I can feel better about myself if I go with what society says is more stylish. What I wear reveals who I really am. So if I'm not happy with myself, what can I do? I can buy an overpair price of sneakers, and instantly I have a better identity. That's a truth claim. Do you recognize it? But here's the underlying thought. Consumerism helps create my identity. I got to buy stuff to prop up my sense of who I am. And I should have the freedom to express myself however I want. These are the subtle truth claims that are getting repeated and repeated thousands of times a day in the average person's feed. What about this one? What's the truth claim here? This was pretty obvious, right? I'm powerful, right? All right, what's the possible truth claim? Yeah, my words create reality. I was dinner with a friend the other day, and they actually said that to me. I said something, and then they were like, I rebuked that. And she's like, I speak this over my life. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You know? Where did you get this idea that you're somehow God, and when you speak, stuff happens, right? You're not God. Your word doesn't have creative power. But it's from that subtle idea that even for Christians, we've seen it so much that we've begun to accept it, that I am the highest authority and power. Therefore, what I say has all the power. That makes me the ultimate authority over my life. Now, next week we'll get into the appeal, because there's something very appealing about this. Right? The appeal is that what you say can't hurt me. I can counteract that. That's a real appealing thought for people that have had hurtful things said to them. But it's not the truth in Jesus. There's a better solution in Jesus to just speaking your own reality, because you can tell yourself 100 times over that, you're not insecure, but probably saying that to yourself, I'm not insecure, I'm not insecure, I'm not insecure, probably makes you insecure, right? Probably just reinforces it. And here's this idea that the universe somehow responds to me. That I can speak stuff and the universe will respond. How crazy is that? Right? If we were to own the outcome of that, what happens if everybody's speaking their different realities the universe responds to? What would we have? What would we have? Absolute chaos. It can't be true. Right? You got to own that outcome, that if you can speak reality, then how many people are on the planet now? 10 billion? 8 billion, right? What happens if 8 billion people are speaking a different version of reality? How does the universe respond to that? It's just ludicrous. But this idea that self-expression is lived truth, that what I say actually shapes, it creates reality for my life. Do we understand? Do we recognize the claims? What about this one? They took a picture of me working out. Right? What's the possible truth claim here? Do you recognize it? I alone determine who I am. Self-determination is true freedom. This is an idea that has gone mainstream in our culture. Right? And you look at that, if you're a guy, you look at that picture and say, yeah, I want to look like that. Become my own standard. Right? And it's this idea that I set the standards for my life. I'm the standard setter. And other people's standards then become oppressive. You actually become an oppressor if you put a different standard on my life. Because freedom is setting my own standards. That's true freedom. And so if the church comes along and says, no, the Bible has a different standard, what does that make the church? Oppressive. That makes the Bible oppressive. That makes God oppressive. And so why would we want to follow God? He's oppressive. Do you understand the claims under stuff that seems like, yes, I get that. I want to have biceps like that. All right, there's an appeal there that I can improve my own life. But subtly, it's undermining the truth. What about this one? And there's like 1,000 variations of this, right? When we were in Thailand, I learned that, do you guys know that Tiger Woods' mom is Thai? And that they have, depending on the day of the week you were born, you have a lucky color that corresponds with that day. Did you know that? Yeah, in Thai thinking, if you are, whatever day you are born on has a color that's your lucky color. Tiger Woods was born on a Sunday, the lucky color for Sunday is red, so what did Tiger always wear on Sundays? Now you know why, right? This idea that, right, the truth claim here is that my sign explains who I am. My identity is shaped by the cosmos, by what day, what year, what stars were in which alignment when I was born. That actually shapes who I am. My relationships are shaped by my circumstances, right? It explains why I'm not a friendly person, or I'm anxious, or I'm guarded, right? It's not that I have things I need to work through and maybe I should get a therapist and talk about them. No, I can just go to astrology because I'm not responsible for how I behave. An impersonal system is responsible for how I behave. So I'm free to act however I want because it's the cosmos, it's not me. What about this one? I hear this all the time from Christians. All right, this idea. What's the truth claim here? Do you see it? Do you recognize it? My feelings need defending. Because the assumption under that, come on, move forward. All right, they understand the assumption behind it is that my feelings reveal what's good for me. Remember, my feelings help me identify what's true. All right, anything that doesn't make me feel good is probably oppressive. This is what's being fed to the majority of young people today, that their feelings need to be defended. Their peace, their sense of personal well-being needs to be protected because their feelings are what show them what's true. And whatever challenges their good feelings is bad and is actually oppressive. This last one here, our second to last one. No one gets to define you but you. What's the possible truth claim here? Self-determination is a right. You have a right to determine who you are. And again, the assumption here is that self is the ultimate authority. To be free, you must choose your identity. External definitions, then, are a form of oppression. So if the Bible says something about gender and that's not what you choose, what does that make the Bible? Oppressive. Do you see how it works? See how the feed is shaping how we think in subtle ways by repeating it over and over and over and over and over again until it's so familiar we stop questioning it. Last one, silence is complicity. Choose a side. What's the possible truth claim here? Refusing to affirm the oppressed is morally wrong. Love requires affirmation is the assumption underneath it. And so choosing a different side than I have makes you an oppressor. Because disagreement is now a form of oppression. And this is an accepted thought that just gets reinforced over and over and over again. So this week's practice. Recognize before you react. Listen with understanding. So start looking at your feed and ask yourself, what is this claim? What is this asking me to actually believe? Name the claim when you're having a conversation with someone. Say, what I hear you saying is that am I hearing this correctly? That we all get to be our own ultimate authority? Just name that. Learn to name the claim. Are we saying that feelings are what ultimately show us the truth? Is that the claim? Start to understand, recognize before you react. We can't reason about a claim we haven't recognized. And then lastly, what's our posture this week? Be ready, be respectful, and be a representative. honor Christ as Lord. Right? Set that authority question in your heart that when it all comes down to it, who gets final say? Is it me? Is it the culture? Is it science? Is it Jesus? Then give a reason for your hope. We'll get into this more in the coming weeks, but make sure you respond with gentleness and respect, because the way you respond is as important as what you say. And then live with a clear conscience, because the goal is not just to expose false claims, it's to represent Christ faithfully. Amen? All right, let me pray for you. Father, thank you for your word that's truth, and it's not just truth to prove people wrong. You want us to be reasonable with it. And I pray that you'd help us internalize these things so that we'd be able to have the ability to reason in our own lives as we think about the things that are confronting us, and as we have conversations with our kids, with our coworkers, with our neighbors, with our friends. Would you help us to be able to think in a reasoned way, that we could bring the truth of who Jesus is and the needs that he fulfills into the lives of those who so desperately need it. And we trust you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, God bless you.